Welcome back to another episode of Profitable Publishing. Today we're going to be talking about a hot topic in the author community, and I know I say that multiple times, but this one is for real, the real deal, hot topic. And it's whether or not you should self-publish, whether or not you should traditionally publish, and which one is really the best choice for you. Now, you might have heard or you might assume that the only options that you have are just those two. And honestly, there are tons of other options in between, and we're going to explore some of those today. I'm Ashley, I'm your host, and I'm a self-publishing consultant and a book marketing strategist, and I support coaches, consultants, speakers, and service providers to package their expertise into a profitable book. And so I, of course, I'm going to approach this in a way that is as unbiased as I can be. However, just for transparency, I have self-published each of my books and support other authors to self-publish or independently publish theirs. And so you may have heard all of these different phrases such as hybrid publishing, traditional publishing, self-publishing, independent publishing, and they each have their own benefits and drawbacks. So with traditional publishing, typically, and all of these are going to be typically because obviously every individual deal is different. But with traditional publishing, you are typically signing away your rights and royalties for the publisher to then be able to use your book to distribute to different places, to help you to get in stores like bookstores. And then also they typically are going to pay you in advance up front. Now that advance is basically your amount that you are going to get your bulk of your income from. Then you're also going to get royalties on the back end. And so that means that you're getting a percentage of the amount that the book is sold for at the end. And so typically a publisher isn't going to pick you up unless they think that your book can be successful. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the publisher is going to help you with your marketing. That, from what I've heard, varies greatly. It really depends on who you are. It really depends on what kind of deal you have. And even when you think about these big names, such as, like, for example, Michelle Obama, she recently had a book that she released called The Look, which showed all of her different gowns and different attire that she wore during a certain time period. She still was doing her own marketing to some degree. Obviously, she has a team. She still was having to make speaking appearances, having to be on different talk shows and podcasts, stuff like that. So there's not really a way to get away from doing some of your own marketing. And that's something that seems to be the thing that many authors assume, that if I go traditional publishing, they're going to do all my marketing for me. And honestly, I have just heard, I don't want to say horror stories, but just reality checks, that that's not the case. So don't assume that just because you get traditionally published that your publisher is going to do all of your marketing for you. Typically, they're not. They're going to expect you to have a certain amount of social media presence, to have a certain email list, and that's kind of going to guarantee, air quotes, guarantee them that they're going to actually get a return on their investment when it comes to shelling out money for you. From smaller authors or authors that are not like super huge runaway successes, from what I found is that most people's advances are going to be on the low 4 figures, mid 5 figures, or even some people are getting 6-figure book deals. Now, a 6-figure book deal, unless you're someone who's famous or well known, is very unusual. And so typically the advances are going to be on that lower end to the 4 figures or low to mid 5 figures. And so if that's something that is going to give you the peace of mind to know, okay, I have the money up front, I'm not trying to get that money back, and then use that to write your book, then traditional publishing might be the route for you. However, you also have to keep in mind that typically you're going to have to look for an agent that is going to agree to pick up your book, to be able to shop your book, and your agent is also going to get a percentage of the cut of what you're receiving as well. That can take years. And so I've seen people say, hey, I'm shopping for someone. I haven't found anybody. It's been decades. My book is still not out. And so that's why people lean more towards self-publishing if they feel like they don't want to wait very long, or if they don't want to share their income with an agent, or if they are thinking that their book is something that publishers might not pick up, because of course your publisher also has to approve and say that they think that your book is good for the market. And so if you have been listening to any kind of the things that are happening in the publishing industry, and they've been happening for decades, but it can be very elitist when it comes to traditional publishing, because obviously the bigger publishers or even the smaller publishers, they can't accept everybody. So they have to be exclusive with who it is that they accept. So if you feel like your book is in a niche that either is not represented in these spaces, especially if you're a minority, there have been cases where people feel like there's underrepresentation. And so that can be something that's very enticing about self-publishing, is that you don't have to wait for someone else to kind of say, okay, your book is good enough. You get to decide that yourself. And then also with self-publishing, some of the benefits are that, well, I'll say benefit and a drawback, is that you get all of the creative control you get all of the creative freedom. With traditional publishing, you typically have to have somebody sign off on those things, even down to your cover, down to the contents of your book. And that can feel limiting because it's your book, it's your baby. And so with self-publishing or independent publishing, you basically get to decide that. At the same time, independent publishing and self-publishing can feel overwhelming if you are making all of the decisions, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And so that's why I offer the Profitable Publishing Partner Service, because I walk alongside clients and I support them to be able to keep their creative control, keep their royalties, to keep their rights, and then they get to have that expertise alongside them to be able to complete the publishing process for them while they also learn the industry expectations for their book. And so if that's something you're interested in, then you can visit the link in the show notes or visit profitableselfpublishing.com/partner and see if it's a good fit for you. Now, going back to self-publishing, there are, of course, pros and cons. When it comes to self-publishing, I typically see people who want to kind of bootstrap everything, meaning that they're trying to figure everything out for themselves. They're doing all of the steps themselves, and that can really be exhausting, and that's not something I typically recommend doing. Now, as someone who, I say self-published, but honestly, I independently published my book. I still hired contractors. I still got expertise and advice from mentors, and for one of my books, I actually did work with somewhat of a hybrid publisher to be able to get my book out. However, it was still a process where I was very hands-on and I had the final say on everything. And I still got to keep all of my files. I have my books inside of my Ingram Spark and Amazon KDP accounts. And so I don't have to navigate around a publisher because I have access to make changes to my books if I need to. I can correct anything like that. Typically with traditional publishing, you don't have those. Typically those publishers are going to keep your book inside of their KDP, their Amazon KDP accounts, inside their Ingram Spark accounts. So that way you are not really able to have that control. And that can really heavily affect things such as your marketing. So if you're trying to run ads or you're trying to like test things out or change or tweak the description, it can be a huge headache because you just don't have access to that information unless your publisher has set it up for you that way. And so one thing I do inside of the Profitable Publishing Partner Service is I equip authors to be able to understand what it looks like on the back end, meaning that those items are set up in their own accounts because they, in essence, become the person or the entity that becomes their publisher. I'm more so the one that walks alongside them to help them to make sure they're not making costly mistakes, to make sure they're setting things up properly, and to really project manage their publishing for them, because it can be overwhelming to think about, I have to write my book, I have to publish my book, and I also have to market my book. And so I do include marketing elements as well in that program. And so with that, self-publishing can be very isolating if you were trying to do everything yourself. There's so many threads that I see, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, actual threads platforms, that are like, I'm trying to figure this out. I downloaded this formatting software and now it's giving me a headache. And there's been multiple times where authors have come to me and needed me to fix their files. In fact, I'm wrapping up a project with one author who I agreed to fix her formatting for her. So in this case, she did hire somebody, but there were still issues that happened. And so, because those things can happen. But when you're if you're the one who's formatting the book yourself, if you're not an expert at formatting, you're a lot more likely to make mistakes. Whereas somebody who all they do is formatting, they're less likely to make that kind of mistake, and then they're less likely to have issues. And so think about it. If you're someone who is working a full-time job or you have a business, you're trying to format your book, you're trying to design a cover that people are going to buy, you're trying to do all these different things on top of writing the book, you're more likely to make those mistakes. And so you want to be mindful of your capacity and what it looks like for you to be able to carry out this process, because you have to remember, this is a full-time job for some people. Like, publishing is a full-time job. Marketing is a full-time job. Understanding that you're trying to do all those things at the same time while also working a full-time job or having a full-time business, it can be overwhelming. And so that's why I always encourage, in some way, shape, or form, hire the help. Get people in to help you, or in the case of the service that I mentioned, the Profitable Publishing Partner Service, hand it over, because at the end of the day, the people who you're hiring, if they're equipped, they already know the common issues that are going to happen. They already understand the tweaks that are not necessarily going to be easy for you to find online. They already get the process. And so you're creating a headache for yourself by trying to do those things yourself, as opposed to being able to save that capacity, saving your time and energy for things that actually are a better fit for what it is that you're working on. So that's just my plug to hire the help, whether it's me or someone else. Hire the help that you need, and understand that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be something where it's a combination of doing these parts and then you handle the other parts. And also, I do offer coaching. However, I typically recommend that people either do the route of working with one person through the continuation of their project and then having them work with the contractors, or doing the route of where they are being coached through the process. Because what can also end up happening is if you're hiring somebody for just one or two elements of your book, then there typically ends up being other things that are missed. And that's something that I've seen with clients that I've taken on for partial portions. I would say, okay, well, we have this part done for you. Do you have this part? Because it was a part that they didn't hire me for. And they would look at me with two, like I have two heads, and say, what do you mean? And so then I have to go back and say, hey, like, these are the steps of the process. And because you came in on step C, you're actually missing step B, part 2. And then it just slows down everything, and then it becomes a headache. And so being mindful of, if you're going to hire, and if you haven't listened to, I believe it's episode 4, but yes, episode 4, episode 4, when to hire help. If you haven't gone back and listened to that, then I encourage you to listen to that, because it actually helps you decide whether or not you need help or whether or not you need to reassess what it is you already have going on. But going back to self-publishing and independent publishing, it gives you the freedom and flexibility to be able to publish at your own pace. You get to decide how often you would have books released, whereas with traditionally published books, you have to basically wait on your book to get picked up. As well, you have that creative control, you have that freedom. Now, at the same time, that freedom can be debilitating, and so it's important to consider if you need to hire someone else to support you with that. And then another reason why I'm a proponent of independent publishing is because you can publish in whatever genres you would like to. You don't necessarily have to be pigeonholed into ones where, if you have a traditional publisher, they might encourage you to go ahead and crank out book 2, 3, 4, and 5 immediately after you've done the first one. And maybe you want to explore different genres. Now, that does mean that you also have to market those and be careful to navigate in and out of those genres so that you are still tapping into your audience. That's something I've done before as an author of books in 4 different genres. So there is a way to do it, but you have to have marketing savvy to be able to do that. Another reason why I'm a huge proponent of independent publishing is that you have that connectivity, or you have the ability to have that connectivity with your readers. And so when you are someone who is selling your own books versus having a publisher sell it for you, in terms of where you have a traditional publishing deal, not where you're getting publishing support, you have the ability to get a little bit of a closer connection with folks who are kind of out in the wild and who purchase your book. And this isn't just me saying it, but it's things I've seen online, specifically on Threads. Someone mentioned that they previously had a traditional publishing deal and they felt very disconnected from their readers. And then now they're doing the independent publishing route and they feel like it's just a totally different game changer. So specifically, with the way in which you structure your pre-orders, or the way in which you structure selling books, whether it's from your site or other platforms, then you have a little bit more leeway in terms of the different bonuses you can include. You have more flexibility into the ways in which you can tie your book into your existing products and services. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that with traditional publishing. You can. However, you have more hoops to kind of jump through typically, because you're having to get things approved by other folks besides yourself. So that's something to consider, especially if you are a coach, a consultant, a service provider, a speaker, and you want to tie your book into your brand. You want to be mindful that all options are not created equally, and you have more flexibility when you are going the independent route with your book. And when I mention independent publishing or self-publishing, I don't necessarily mean doing this in isolation by yourself. I mean like working with a consultant like myself, which is essentially the way in which I support clients. Now, I want to address how you would get paid as an independent author, self-published author. So instead of getting your advance up front, typically you're going to get that money after your book is out or after your book is published. However, I do teach the strategy inside of my Pre-Order Profits program to be able to use your book launch to create your own advance. So the authors I work with typically are able to make their money back within 90 days of their book's release or before. I've had authors do it before their book is out, within the first 30 days of their pre-order, or even before that. I had one author do it within 4 hours. She's amazing. And so just really using the strategies can be helpful. So it doesn't have to be that you're waiting years and years and years to make your money back if you go the self-published route or the independent published route. And it's something I've done multiple times with each of my books that I've released. I've been able to cover my publishing costs and actually cover some of my marketing costs as well as create some household income for myself. And so it doesn't have to be where it's either you get your money up front from a publisher or you are waiting years and years and years to get your money back. There are options in between. And that's really the point I want to drive home with this episode, is that it doesn't have to be this, it can be in between. You don't have to do traditional publishing. You don't have to do self-publishing. You can get support along the way through a self-publishing consultant like myself, or through coaching or something of that sort. It doesn't have to be where you're doing everything yourself or giving away all of your creativity and your flexibility and your freedom. Now, at the same time, of course, there are levels, so it really depends on the deal that you have set up with your publisher. If you're going the traditionally published route, of course, I'm sure some bigger names have more flexibility and more leeway to be able to do the things they want to do. However, typically for most authors, that's not going to be the case. And then with self-publishing, I'm sure there are people who are just rock stars and they can do every single thing themselves and they have maintained their sanity. But for the majority of self-published authors, it is a very challenging thing to do by yourself when you're doing everything. And so I don't recommend doing that. Now, I have had people ask me, so would you ever do traditional publishing? And yes, I would. I totally would. I'm not opposed to traditional publishing, but I do understand that there's certain things that you have to be mindful of and certain things that you have to be okay with. With whatever option you pick, whether it's self-publishing, traditional publishing, independent publishing, hybrid publishing, which is a mix of the two, where you kind of share some of the responsibility for the funding depending on your deal, or your hybrid company might also share that funding for you, but then they might also want some of your royalties. So it's kind of like a mix of self-publishing and traditional publishing. You just have to really understand your contract. You have to understand what you're signing up for. You have to understand when you can earn out your advance. You have to understand what these things are and the ways in which you're navigating. You also have to understand what you're taking on and how it can affect the other parts of your life. Because like children, your book is a baby. Until it's able to maintain itself, until it's able to kind of stand up on its own and fly the coop, leave your house. It might come back to your house. I'm a millennial. I know a lot of us have come back to our homes, and actually across the world, it's a pretty typical thing to live in multi-generational houses. But your book needs the support, and so you have to be mindful that you have to give it that support. So regardless of if you are traditionally published, regardless of if you are traditionally published or if you're self-published, your book is going to need that marketing support to get where it needs to go so that it can start marketing itself. Because if you don't, then you're going to consistently have something that's not self-sustaining and that's not generating income or supporting you to be able to build your audience, build your brand, things of that sort. So I hope today's episode has been helpful. Thank you for tuning in, and please share this with an author who is debating whether or not they should traditionally publish or if they should self-publish, and let them know that there are options in between. Thanks for listening. Stay profitable.